Did you know that a nation once waged war against birds and lost? Sounds unbelievable, right? Imagine a conflict where the enemy troops were not soldiers but flightless birds. Yes, we're talking about the Great Emu War in Australia, an event that turned the tide of human-animal relations. In this video, we'll journey through the unique events, the strategies employed, and the surprising outcome of this peculiar war. So buckle up, history buffs and animal lovers alike. So let's dive right into the Great Emu War. It all started in late 1932 in Western Australia. The vast expanse of the outback was experiencing an unusually harsh drought, leaving the native emus in a dire search for sustenance. Now, imagine being an emu. Your habitat, once teeming with food and water, has turned into a barren, inhospitable land. What would you do? You'd probably do what any sensible creature would: you'd migrate. And that's exactly what these emus did. In a desperate quest for survival, they journeyed en masse to regions abundant in food and water. Their destination? The lush, green farmlands of Western Australia. These farms, cultivated by hard-working Australians, were a veritable feast for the emus. Grains aplenty, water in abundance. It was an emu's paradise. But this migration, though a simple act of survival for the emus, spelled disaster for the farmers. Their crops were being decimated, their livelihoods threatened. What do you think happened next when thousands of emus invaded the farmlands? Imagine waking up to a sea of large birds eating your crops. The emus, native to Australia, had always been a part of the landscape. But in the early 1930s, something changed. As thousands of emus migrated inland, the farmers of Western Australia found themselves in a predicament. These emus, typically harmless, turned into voracious eaters, decimating precious wheat crops. Now imagine being those farmers. You've labored day in, day out, under the harsh Australian sun to grow your crop. You've invested your time, your energy, your money, and your hope in that field. And then, just as the wheat begins to ripen, you wake up to find a sea of large birds, each standing nearly 6 feet tall, feasting on your hard work. The emus didn't discriminate. They ate everything in sight, leaving the fields barren. It was like a natural disaster, but one of feathers and beady eyes. The farmers could only watch helplessly as their livelihood was being systematically destroyed. The financial loss was devastating, the emotional toll, even worse. These were the days of the Great Depression, mind you. For many of these farmers, the wheat they were growing was their only source of income. The emus took that away. Desperate and distraught, the farmers did the only thing they could think of. They asked the Australian government for help. They pleaded for the military to step in, to use their machine guns to stop the emus. It may seem extreme, but from the farmer's perspective, this was a matter of survival. So what did the government do? Did they dismiss the farmers' pleas as absurd? Or did they see the gravity of the situation and act? Well, let's just say that the response was unexpected. The desperate farmers turned to the government for help, leading to the declaration of an unusual war. Now picture the government deciding to fight back against these winged invaders. Imagine the Australian government, desperate to protect the livelihoods of their farmers, making an unprecedented decision. A decision to wage war against emus. Yes, you heard it right. The emus, a flightless bird native to Australia, were now the enemy. In an act that would later be viewed as both comical and tragic, the government decided to send soldiers into the fray. But these were not ordinary soldiers, and this was not an ordinary war. They were armed not with typical weapons of war, but with machine guns. The mission was clear: exterminate the emus that were causing such havoc on the Australian farmlands. The soldiers, trained for combat against human foes, were now expected to turn their skills against birds. This was no small task. Emus are large, fast, and surprisingly resilient. But the government was resolute. The emus had to be stopped. And so the battle lines were drawn. Can you imagine what it was like when the first shots were fired? Picture this: a sunny day, a vast open field, and an army of flightless birds, the emus scurrying about. The soldiers, armed and ready, take aim and fire. The war has begun. The initial encounters between the soldiers and the emus were far from what anyone would have expected. These weren't your typical enemies. They didn't march in formation or follow any predictable patterns. They were fast, unpredictable, and surprisingly resilient. Imagine being a soldier in that scenario. You've been trained to face human adversaries, not a flock of birds. The emus scattered in all directions, their speed and agility making it challenging for the soldiers to take aim. The birds didn't know they were in a war. For them it was just another day, another field to explore. The soldiers were faced with a unique challenge: They couldn't simply charge at the emus or trap them in a corner. They had to chase them down, aim and fire, all while the emus darted about in a frenzy. It was a chaotic scene, a bizarre dance between man and bird. The soldiers were equipped with Lewis guns, powerful machine guns designed for warfare, but these weapons were not designed for bird hunting. The emus could withstand several shots and still keep running. It was as if they were wearing invisible armor. Despite these obstacles, the soldiers pressed on. They chased the emus across the fields, firing shot after shot, hoping to curb their numbers. But the emus proved to be formidable adversaries. They were survivors, built to withstand the harsh Australian wilderness. They dodged bullets, outran soldiers, and continued to thrive despite the ongoing assaults. The soldiers may have had the firepower, the training, and the strategy, but the emus had the home advantage. They knew the terrain, they were agile and fast, and they were fighting for their survival. It was a battle of endurance, a test of wills. Despite their best efforts, the soldiers were no match for the emus. This war against birds was unlike any other, a war where the supposed underdogs held the upper hand. The battle had just begun, and it was already clear. The emus were not going down without a fight. Who would have thought that a bird could outsmart a soldier? A question that might seem ludicrous, but not when you dive into the surprising conclusion of the Great Emu War. As the conflict raged on, it became increasingly clear that the emus were not your typical adversary. These birds, with their swift speed and unpredictable movements, proved to be a formidable opponent for the Australian military. The soldiers, armed with machine guns and a determined resolve, found themselves in a situation they never expected. A battlefield where their enemy was not another army but a flock of flightless birds. Despite their best efforts, the military's campaign was a far cry from successful. The emus, with their uncanny ability to scatter and regroup, were able to evade the soldiers at every turn. The vastness of the Australian outback played in their favor, providing ample space for the birds to disperse, making it nearly impossible for the soldiers to corner them. The military's attempts to curb the emu population proved futile. The birds continued to thrive, their numbers barely dented by the war efforts. The soldiers, meanwhile, found themselves in a battle that was draining their resources and yielding little to no results. After a month of fruitless attempts, the Australian government decided to withdraw the military. This decision marked the end of the Great Emu War, a conflict that had started with high hopes of victory but ended in an unexpected defeat. The emus continued their existence, their presence a constant reminder of the war that had been waged against them. This wasn't just a battle lost, it was a lesson learned. A lesson about the resilience of nature, about the unpredictability of life, and most importantly, about the humility that comes from acknowledging that sometimes the unexpected can indeed happen. The Great Emu War was a testament to the power of the unexpected, a reminder that victory isn't always achieved by the strongest or the most powerful, but sometimes by the most resilient. In this bizarre battle, the emus emerged victorious. But what happened after the guns fell silent, you may wonder? In the quiet aftermath of the Great Emu War, the echoes of its bizarre battles still reverberated across the vast Australian outback. The war had ended, but the struggle was far from over. The public reaction to the war was a blend of disbelief, amusement, and criticism. Many questioned the wisdom of deploying military forces against flightless birds, while others laughed off the whole episode as a uniquely Australian affair. The international media too had a field day with the story, and the Great Emu War quickly became fodder for headlines, cartoons, and late-night comedy routines. Yet for the farmers of Western Australia, the situation was no laughing matter. The emus, unfazed by the war, continued to ravage their crops, threatening their livelihoods. In their desperation, the farmers turned to other methods to control the emu population. Some resorted to building fences around their fields. Others tried trapping or poisoning the birds, and a few even attempted to domesticate them. The results were mixed, but over time, they managed to reduce the impact of the emu invasions. The Great Emu War, a war between man and bird, ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. It was a war that Australia couldn't win, a war that has since become a symbol of the country's resilience, humor, and unique relationship with its wildlife. And that, my friends, is the story of how Australia lost a war against birds.
Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notification and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.